Kynan has successfully found his way into the inside of the town of Red Crest, where he hopes to find Asha to fulfill an iron vow he has sworn to Asha's mother, an exile from Red Crest who asked Kynan to find her daughter and keep her safe. And in the process of seeking that reunion between mother and daughter, Kynan has happened into a reunion of his own. Because although he found himself captured by the local guard in a bit of a comedy of errors, he also made the acquaintance of Morgan, the local guard captain, and also the leader of his prior band that he ran with, and that eventually ended up being betrayed by Kaladas. So, have the friendship bonds endured the test of the previous years, or does Morgan hold perhaps a little grudge because of Kynan's, well, lack of loyalty? Only one way to find out. Let's start playing. Hey, how are ya? I'm Anderson, and this is Kill 10 Rats Plays Ironsworn, Chapter 2, Episode 6. We are in Red Crest in a cell. Fortunately, a cell with an open door, as the guard Bevis has just been sent away, and Morgan, Kynan's previous leader and now captain of Red Crest's guard, is standing in the doorframe with a somewhat amused expression, looking at Kynan, who is still aghast, sitting on his chair, on his little prisoner's stool, and I guess we're gonna take it from there. There's one thing I'd like to do and note down in the process of this, as sort of taking stock in terms of milestone on our background vow and our inciting incident vow, which, to remind ourselves, we are looking to find Kaladas and make him pay as our background vow, and find Siora's remains and lay them to rest, which is tied to the site of Kaladas's betrayal, so it's also quite a extreme vow. And I think we have made some progress here. So in terms of reaching Red Crest, making it through the deep wilds, that is one progress for both of these. And the fact that Kynan managed to determine the gist of the information he gathered from the traveling refugee out in Bas's refugee camp, that Kaladas is currently separated from Vigo of Summersong and has secluded himself, or perhaps previously secluded himself, we don't know whether he's still there, in a place called the Marsh of Souls. So we have a lead. I think we should reflect that by also giving ourselves another progress mark on our background vow, because that is a viable, valid piece of information. Doesn't affect the Siora vow too much, because it might even cause a divergence in paths, we don't know yet. But that does put us at 3 ticks on our background vow and 4 ticks on our inciting incident vow. I'm not sure we've reached a milestone quite yet on the find Asha and keep her safe vow. We've sort of found her. At least we were shouting back and forth through a closed door. But I'm gonna hold off on that one. I think once we've consolidated our position with Morgan and figured out whether we're still on the same side, we might mark down some progress on this dangerous vow here. So, as the footsteps of Bevis, the guard, recede down the corridor and Morgan smirks at Kynan, and Kynan looks back at him, almost dumbfounded really. He can't help himself and just comes out and asks, "How did you end up here?" And looking at Morgan's profile, we don't really know. We just know he has a desire to defend this place, but I think the easiest explanation for him being here is perhaps he's from here. So let's ask the Oracle. 50-50, 51 plus. This is actually where Morgan came from originally. 04, that is a no. So this is not the settlement that Morgan originated from. He just happens to be here. He found himself here. Is he even willing to share this, or, well, is he gonna be standoffish? I think we should determine this first, and maybe we have him turn it around on Kynan a little, as he in turn says, "What kind of an interrogation do you take this to be, dear boy?" Where the prisoner asks the questions. And as they lock eyes in that moment, we will test our bond. I think this is warranted even though no immediate betrayal happened just now, but just the circumstances under which Kynan and Morgan parted many moons ago would be that Morgan was exiled. Kynan didn't stand up for him because that's not his way. Kynan didn't stand up for Kaladas either, but he chose to follow him. So, did that do some damage? Is the bond fragile, or are they still very much on the same side? So let's roll plus heart and see where we stand with this. 4 + 2 beats 4 and 5. We are off to a lucky one, so we can actually take 2 momentum from this. And how do I picture this going in the fiction? I think there is a moment where Morgan gives Kynan a hard stare, and Kynan returns the stare, his eyes narrowing, and he still has his sword, and he lowers his hand to the pommel, and Morgan does the same, his hand wandering to the heft of his weapon. And right before both of them get a grip and come to blows, they burst out laughing and get up and do that hug, pat on the back combo, as they both understand that the friendship they shared, or at least the camaraderie that they shared in the past, still holds up, and perhaps even an element of nostalgia, seeing somebody that is a connection point to your previous history. So they're still good, and that also puts us in a pretty good position in terms of finding out what's actually going on here, and perhaps even getting hold of Asha. So after that spontaneous embrace, Morgan takes a step back. You know how it is. After that business with Kaladas, I tried to find work some other way, and the only way to work is with one of these. And he pats his weapon as he continues. Did some mercenary work in the north, but as things were heating up and as I got word of our prophet, I decided it might be more conducive to a healthy, long life if I were to move south. And Kynan gives him a hard look. You know then who he is. I know who he pretends to be. As for who he is, I would not have the first idea, dear boy. And Kynan snorts and nods, because honestly he doesn't have the first idea of who Kaladas really is either. He just knows that the one that took over his band and the one that is now considered this prophet is one and the same person, and obviously so does Morgan. Way it sounds, talking to the refugees outside. Won't be long before you get to see him again. I am aware, and much as I would like to now pound my chest and boast how let him come, we'll be ready. Even without a disease ravaging this town, it wouldn't be able to put up much of a fight against Viggo and his armies. Armies can come and go and live and die as they please. I will find him, and I will make him pay. And Morgan's about to chuckle when he sees the determination in Kynan's expression, and he shrugs and says, You might at that. Perhaps his head will fall right around the time they've turned these lands to dust and ash. I'll tell it true to you, dear boy. Whether Kaladas lives or dies is little concern to me at this moment. We have other problems here. So I hear. This illness. Tell me about it. And with that in-character question as a jumping off point, we are now at the point where we should probably determine what exactly this illness is. Now, I have had some thoughts about this, and I think we also already have a number of elements to narrow down what this illness does and like give ourselves some mental image. And I think one of the elements we should remember is that it was used initially by a firstborn or the firstborn to wipe out the village that Saskia and Kynan happened on after they met Erin. We've also already determined that the fellow villagers were generally of a mind to force the infected to stay in their houses, to almost lock them in. And from these details, I figure that we can make a few assumptions. So if I go through the roster of themes that we have, which is that nature strikes back, and the firstborn connection, and the fact that the victims of the illness are being locked up, my first association was that it was something akin to rabies, but in a very exaggerated sense. So there is an incubation period during which the infected person seems normal, perhaps some first signs show, like an aversion to water or some itchiness, closeness in the throat, and then once this manifests more and more, after a few days the person becomes exceedingly irrational and easy to anger and agitate, and then eventually, and this is where I'm kind of turning this into like a mystical weaponized version of a disease, starts lashing out and attacking friends, family, anyone around, and that these bites and scratches and attacks then in turn also serve to propagate, and that this is the way, or the key way in which this illness works its way through a population. It effectively, well, the old village, I assume they actively poisoned or infected either a food source or a water supply, so got a lot of people at once. And in Red Crest, it seems that either it was a extension of the nature striking back phenomenon where wildlife attacks brought the disease to the people, or the disease broke out among the people through some other actor or agent, and that way the animals got infected. And that sort of puts a question mark on the sequence of events. That's, for me, is the big open question, is where did this disease originate, because someone must have manufactured it the first time, and how now did it come to flare up again and coincide with these wildlife attacks that target the lumber camps of Red Crest and now have also found a way into town itself. So I think based on that premise, we can now have Morgan share the sequence of events as he understands it with Kynan, which is that some weeks ago attacks started happening on the workers in the lumber camps at the edge of the deep wilds, where they tend to spend a few days before bringing their take back to town to be sold or being used. And in the aftermath of these attacks, people started acting strangely, or coinciding with these attacks, people started acting strangely and attacking each other. And in the process of these events unfolding, the village elders drew the connection to the fate of the old village that had fallen to a similar outbreak of disease, and then in its weakened state had been attacked and wiped out by the firstborn. And maybe that could be interesting. I just think, because if I consider Erin, she's also of that age where she remembers that village falling, and she has sort of a connection to the forest and to that area. I'm wondering, is she perhaps even originally from the old village instead of from Red Crest? I mean, she's an outcast from Red Crest now, but maybe she was originally, as a child, one of the few survivors of the old village. That could make it very interesting also as a reason for her expulsion now, where the people of Red Crest point fingers at her and go, "You mad herb cutting woman, you go into the forest a lot anyway, now you brought this on us like you brought it on your old village." That could be a good thing. Let's make it, I would say, actually likely in terms of the logic of the story, that Erin is an orphan taken in by Red Crestians from when the old village fell. So 26 plus, yup, she's from there. 65, that's a yes. So now I'm picturing Morgan and Kynan comparing notes a bit more extensively, in the process of which Morgan also says, "You know, all this dire talk is making me thirsty. Let's go to my house." And so as they meander out the tunnel and towards one of the houses sort of on the slope up to the Jarl's longhouse up on the ridge, we also have Kynan inquiring about Erin and Asha, and I think Morgan sharing what he knows about Erin's origin and that people were suspicious of her and that she ended up getting cast out because there was a rumor about her and her time spent in the woods, and that she's perhaps a bit too attached to the misery or the downfall of the old village, but also a bit too close to the firstborn in the way that she interacts with the forest and how she, unlike the rest of the villagers, seems to more respect it and hold it sacred. And as they reach Morgan's house, which is also one of those A-frame shaped houses with a fairly low ceiling and where he clearly also lives alone, fairly modest place with a fire pit in the center and it's like a small fire still burning there. He grabs an earthen jug and pours some clear spirits into some mugs and hands one to Kynan, who knocks it back and shudders at the assault of this Ironlander moonshine. I think if we want to build Asha now and understand more about her part in all of this, we should gather information again. So let's see what Morgan is willing to share, considering he also has a official position and this is a condemned prisoner who's supposed to be executed in the morning. So we picture Kynan and Morgan sitting there having their drinks and still talking about the disease outbreak and the timeline and people getting attacked by and savaged by animals, and then having these outbreaks in town, and Erin, rumors spreading and her disappearing, half cast out, half just packing her bags in the middle of the night and escaping, maybe even trying to deflect the blame by making an obvious move away to keep her daughter out of it, which obviously failed. And we don't know, perhaps it's justified, perhaps Erin is culpable. We still need to figure out where this all originated, but we'll leave that up to the timely dice rolls at the point where it becomes relevant. So who knows? I mean, it's not to say that either Asha or Erin are innocent of what's happening here. It might well be that they're the instigators, or it's the firstborn again. We'll figure that out eventually. But for now, we'll have to drag it out of Morgan a little bit. So let's gather information, and we do share a bond, so we add +1. Well, that could have gone better. Okay, let's make sense of this. We roll a negative match. Does that mean that Morgan now closes down and not tell us anything about Asha or even misleads us? Wouldn't make a lot of sense unless there's somehow a reason for it. He also wants to protect a secret, so let's give it a 50-50. So is there a reason, a connection between Morgan and Asha that means that he now shuts down and perhaps even tries to divert Kynan's attention somehow? 51 plus, yes there is. 0-3, absolutely not. Okay, so it's not the conversation topic itself, which makes me think maybe it's the conversation circumstance. Are we not getting anything out of Morgan because with that 8 something drastic happens that makes it no longer possible to have this exchange? Let's go to the oracles and get some input here. 83 support. 07 survival. Support survival. I mean, the only one who's about to not survive is Asha, at least unless Kynan finds a way to save her from her execution. So how would her survival be supported? Who would support her survival? maybe we need to look at this through the lens of our themes again. We have Nature Strikes Back, we have the undercurrent of that rabies disease, and we have support survival of Asha, who may or may not be indirectly or directly involved in the unleashing or creation. No, well, unleashing of the disease. Creation, she wasn't born. So if we think about the Oracle prompt in terms of those factors, maybe what happens is the forces of nature, such as they are, perhaps even just in the throes of this disease, create an opening for Asha's survival, and we can read that Oracle prompt as the village coming under attack, which naturally also means that the whole exchange of information gets put on the back burner and maybe even invalidated, depending on how all of this goes. I think I'm going to ask the combat action Oracle just to get an idea on how this intervention now goes down. Like, what theme of attack do we work with here? Is it something very open? Is it something sneaky? Or what is happening? 91, attack with power. So we get a show of force, I would read this as. I'm just thinking, like, if we have an attack in force now with the express purpose to break Asha out, or at least ensure her survival, is there a force behind it? We don't need to decide yet whether Asha is the force or there's some outside actor, but is this a conscious effort? Are these creatures, these attackers, being sent? Or is this happenstance, coincidence? So basically, is this coordinated? I'd almost call that likely in terms of writing logic, but let's give it a 50-50. 51 plus is a yes. 92, that's a strong yes. So this is a coordinated attack in force through the theme of disease and nature striking back. I think that gives me an idea of what I can work with here. While Kynan and Morgan are sitting in Morgan's house and having their drink and their ongoing conversation, the background murmur noise, like a rushing kind of sound, like the wind picking up outside, but with an undertone of just high-pitched, agitated screeching, first doesn't really catch the attention of either of the two, but after a few minutes it becomes undeniable that there is something going on outside. There is a cacophony hanging above the village, and as Morgan and Kynan exchange an uneasy glance, they both reach for their weapons, get up, and Morgan exits the house before Kynan stops dead, and they both look up and they see against the partly cloudy sky, illuminated by a almost full moon, that a cloud of birds is circling the village. The upper and lower village, it's a mass of birds and different species, different kinds of birds, all converging in a convulsing mass that is circling in place quicker and quicker and quicker and more agitated, and the noise and this current of air that is just getting stronger and stronger, the noise drawing people from their houses. So it's not only Kynan and Morgan now standing looking up with some concern at this massive flying wildlife converging like something they've never seen before, like a dome of birds above Red Crest. It's now also just all the doors of the houses that aren't barred up flying open, and people looking at the sky and coming together and talking to each other and agitatedly looking at the sky, and then with the screeching getting louder and louder and the airflow extremely agitated to the point where people's hair is starting to flutter in the wind. The first birds in batches of 5 and 6 up to a dozen now start dive bombing down at the people, and the whole cloud of flying creatures descends almost to ground level, just flying around and making it almost impossible to move through, like a wall of small bodies that are at the same time also trying to embed themselves into people's heads and bodies and wherever they can find an opening. And as that first cloud descends and bobs downward, only to briefly recede back up again and converge down again, just these constant up and down contractions and brief relaxations, we roll a face danger to see how Kynan copes. I think we're gonna do iron, so we're gonna picture like a situation where he just tries to have his armored bits catch the brunt of the assault. And I think I'm gonna do it endure stress here, because more than anything this is a very frightening and unnatural kind of attack. So it's roll plus spirit. That's a miss, and we suffer 1 momentum loss here. And I think I read this as Kynan taking a few steps backing into the door frame and sort of peeking out and even dragging Morgan back with him. And I think Morgan only takes a few steps back, looks around and goes for his shield on the ground that he's got leaning against his wall, and straps it to his arm. And he rips a torch out from a holder by the entry. Doesn't really say anything, just runs back out there. Because now there'll be people lying on the ground, bloodied and in need of someone to pull them to safety, get them into a house where the birds can't follow. And now what does Kynan do? This is a bit of a predicament, because he now knows that there is this attack going on, and that the only thing at the moment to really save you from it is to have a roof over your head. And he also knows that Saskia and Baz and his refugee caravan are outside there, and the only thing that really separates them from this attacking swarm is a thin layer of canvas on some of the wagons that they have. So I think he might wanna, well, given what happened in Stone Ridge, I think he's not gonna just sit there and wait for this to blow over. So he starts looking around for a shield, and let's see if Morgan has another one. I'm just gonna misappropriate the check your gear move here. We roll this plus supply, that makes it a weak hit and costs us 1 supply and adds 1 momentum. We can picture this as perhaps it's not a shield, perhaps it's just a square table that Kynan picks up and lifts over his head, and he just unhooks one of the straps of one of his packs that he's carrying to balance out the load and the weight a little, so he leaves some supply behind, and he rushes out into the chaos. And that, unfortunately, is also all we have time for today. Tiny bit of a cliffhanger, but I'll leave it till next week to find out what happens. So, thank you very much for watching. I'll catch you next time, and bye for now.